We like the idea of sharing, communal property, but it does lead to what economists call the tragedy of the commons. It's a tragedy because nasty things happen when everyone owns something. I first heard that phrase in a story about some shepherds who lived around a grassy area they called a commons. Since all the shepherds shared this free green grass, they grabbed as much of it as possible. They kept breeding sheep and bringing many more sheep to graze, but soon all the grass was gone. The sheep died, and the shepherds had nothing. So then they divided the commons into parcels. Now each shepherd owned one. Each had an incentive to limit the number of sheep that grazed on his grass. Prosperity happened, and everyone lived happily ever after. Look at those buffalo roam. Bison are a great example of the tragedy of the commons. 30 million of them once roamed in America. But because no one owned them, or rather everyone owned them, Indians and the white settlers kept hunting them until they were nearly extinct. The buffalo herd went from 30 million to 1,000. But now, good news, they've made a comeback, all because now people own them. Brian Yablonsky's here to help explain what happened. What happened?
Well, property rights were established over the very few remaining bison that were left. When the bison got down to about 1,000, there were some cattle ranchers who were entrepreneurial enough to figure out that the bison were worth more alive than dead at that point. And so they went out to the Great Plains and gathered the few remnants of what was left, about 10, 15 bison, and grew them into the herds that today have led to the bison's comeback. They
protected them for their own profit.
They found a way to make the bison pay. The bison market for them was meat. They sold bison to circuses, to zoos, and to public preserves.
And before that, when there were 30 million bison, at first, there weren't enough Indians who killed them. They were doing okay. And the white settlers couldn't really get west to kill enough to endanger them.
Right. You had a commons without access to it. And right after the Civil War, when the Transcontinental Railroad was built, all of a sudden you could get hunters into the plains, and you could get the bison back to the markets in the east and overseas. That's when the real tragedy occurred.
And some people just shot them from the trains for sport.
Yeah, it was wanton waste. They weren't even collecting the bison. They were just shooting them for fun.
All right, so now we've saved the bison. What about the elephants in Africa?
Well, some of the same concepts used to save the bison have been used to save elephants in Zimbabwe. What essentially has been done is they've provided ownership interest to villagers in Zimbabwe, and that is helping to save them. Prior to that, you had communal lands in Zimbabwe. The villagers...
You had the government saying, don't kill the elephants.
Don't kill the elephants. The villagers were growing crops, put livestock on those communal lands, and the elephants were coming through and destroying those crops, and other wildlife was running off their livestock. The villagers didn't have any interest in protecting wildlife.
So when the poachers came, they would just look the other way. Go ahead, kill the...
They would look the other way. Then what happened is villagers were allowed to start getting proceeds from trophy hunts and from safari tourism that came through there. And all of a sudden, the wildlife became an asset. They hired their own game wardens. Wildlife habitat actually doubled because now the wildlife was a benefit to the villagers. And as a result, the elephant population also doubled over a period of 13 years.
And why do you know about this? You're with PERC, stands for?
Property and Environment Research Center.
Which is based in Bozeman, Montana, and you folks study areas where private property can help protect animals?
Absolutely. We believe that ownership provides the best incentives for conservation.
And most of the buffalo now are owned by private ranchers, but there are still some in state parks, or one state park, and one has a roundup.
One has a roundup, and they're actually treating their bison most like private ranchers are treating their bison. They're making their bison pay. And what they do is once a year, for 45 years, they have this huge roundup where they bring in their 1,500 bison, and tourists come from all over the world, pay money to watch these bison get herded in sort of an old Wild West fashion with cowboys and cowgirls. And the bison come sweeping down the plains, the earth shakes, they get moved into corrals, and then we all go eat bison burgers afterwards. But the point is, the park is making money from the tourism on bison, And then about a month later, they auction off a portion of that bison to private ranchers, and they're also making money that way. All that money goes back into Custer State Park to pay for operations of the park. So the bison are paying their own way.